Five underrated and underlooked. Five underrated and underlooked videos for 2015. I recently did an overrated albums list for 2015, so I thought I'd return the favor, if that makes sense, for 2015. Return the favor for that year and talk about music that actually was very good but got a little shafted to the wayside. What the fuck am I even saying? The overrated albums list did surprisingly well. I didn't think it was going to, so I thought, why not carry it on, keep the series going by talking about albums that I felt just got a little bit less positive reception than I would have wanted them to. Of course, it's just all my opinion. Perhaps these albums are actually loved by many. I mean, some of them I think are loved by many, but in the critics' sense, I think we often sort of let albums slip by in a way, so I just kind of wanted to highlight some that I think are worth your time. Just going to talk about this list in no particular order, as always, for these kind of lists. Going to mention 5, and while I remember, make sure you comment some albums you felt were I keep saying underlooked. That's not even a thing. Underrated and overlooked for 2015, because yeah, it'd be interesting to see what people think, and I'd be really happy to be, turned on to some albums that I hadn't already heard of, and I hadn't have thought about checking out prior to this video. So do it. Comment some albums. I'm gonna start with one of the most interesting bands to come from the UK this decade, in my opinion, Young Fathers. The album being White Men Are Black Men Too, which I must admit, I think the album title is exactly why it got overlooked. Bearing in mind, a year before this, they released their album Dead. It got a Mercury Prize. It got a lot of attention from outsiders who suddenly decided that, they'd check out this band because they'd been around for a couple of years, making some interesting type of music. And Dead was sort of their push into a bigger audience, a sort of bigger spotlight for them. Then a year later they go a little left field and call their album White Men Are Black Men Too. It probably didn't really give a lot of critics reason to check this out. It's a little bit of an edgy album title, a bit politically incorrect, a bit odd, a bit like, what does that even mean? I think this album, I'm not gonna bother with this album. This sounds ridiculous. But then the album actually sort of explains what that means in one of the songs of the album, and it actually ends up being an incredibly fun, like power pop, lo-fi indie pop album that I wasn't expecting at all. Sort of in the vein of like Ariel Pink, if anyone's a fan of Ariel Pink, but it was a bit brighter there in Ariel Pink. There was some huge like choruses and bops on that album. Tracks like Shame, Rain or Shine, honestly just wonderful pop tracks that I play a lot. They also made their way onto the Trainspotting 2 soundtrack, which is a film I did not like, but a lot of people did like it. And the fact that a band like this made it onto that soundtrack is really impressive to me. But yeah, I just feel like now that Cocoa Sugar's come out, people are more hyped for that one. A lot of people call it their album of the year now. It brought in a bigger audience once again. More people started turning their heads towards Young Fathers. And I feel like a few years later, this one isn't getting talked about as much now. It certainly got its praise where it was due in 2015 by a lot of people. But Young Fathers still sort of get overlooked in a lot of conversations about music. I feel like it's only been this year with Cocoa Sugar that people are more aware of them and talking about them a lot more. But whereas I think White Men Are Black Men Too is their best album, so this is why it's making this list. The next album on the list is No Now by Clarence Clarity. Again, this was quite a critically acclaimed album by a lot of people and a lot of critics. But generally, Clarence Clarity actually hasn't garnered a big audience since this album. To say how many people loved the hell out of this album, praised its eccentric and forward-thinking pop production, the amazing ideas that went into this album, like, there are so many people that loved it, but yeah, overall, Clarence Clarity is still pretty relatively unknown. Clarence Clarity's production has seen more artists since this though. Of course, he worked with Rina Sawayama. His name is getting out there, but you know, imagine if this guy just broke through, you know, like he really deserves it after this album. Like he really deserves that big push to work with bigger artists, kind of like in the way Sophie has. You know, you see Sophie's production on so much stuff these days. There's even rumors like she's going to be working with Lady Gaga, and like it's just insane to see that she's broken through in such a big way. Whereas like Clarence Clarity is sort of on the other end of the spectrum, doing different stuff but really unique and accessible stuff, and yet I don't really see his name get mentioned very often. His production could easily be accessible to massive audiences, which is why I'm putting him on this list, because No Now is a very good album, but it isn't really an album that you see get considered album of the year, even though it could have easily been many people's album of the year if they'd have heard it otherwise. Next, I want to talk about Leanne La Havas, her album Blood. I'm expecting her to drop another album at some point this year, because it has been quite a while since this one, so I thought she would release something by now anyway. But yeah, Leanne La Havas, man, got a great voice, very soulful sound. She knows how to make a great poppy, peppy sort of pop track too. In the song What You Don't Do, even Unstoppable has this like really uprising production. It's so glistening. It's such a wonderful song, and most of these tracks were just really well made pop tracks that had a soulful feel to them. She has a great voice, and I feel like this would have done well if it had the sort of push it should have had. I at least think she deserved more with the singles that came from this album, even if people didn't really take to the album in full all the way, even though I think it was one of the best of the year. But yeah, I just thought she certainly has a sound that can be marketable for more people, and I just don't really know why she didn't take off. I mean, just think about how, like, you know, you turn on the radio and you still hear like Human by Rag and Bone Man, and it's like this guy has no soul to him whatsoever, yet people took this song and went crazy for it. And yet you have someone like Leanne La Havas, who's just like, you know, being completely overlooked by radio and like, you know, pop stations, and I just don't get why. She has a very good sound, you know, and yeah, I think this album was definitely underrated too. I didn't really see many people praise it that much, aside from me and perhaps a few other critics. But yeah, I genuinely thought it was one of the best of the year, but you know, maybe some people just didn't like it that much. I don't know. Next, I want to talk about an artist that I'm pretty sure anyone that watches my videos enjoys this artist anyway, but I'm going to explain why they're on the list, and that is Injury Reserve with Live at the Dentist Office. Now, this got praised by a lot of critics, and this was like the new breakout hip-hop artist of 2015, like one of the biggest ones so many people on the internet were going crazy for. But the thing with Injury Reserve I've noticed is that, like, yeah, they drop a project and people, you know, really like it, they really praise it, they call it one of the best of the year. But when hip-hop discussions are being had, I never see him get referenced. It's like everyone recognises that they're a really talented hip-hop group, one of the better ones that we've had of this decade, you know, with along with artists like Flatbush Zombies, maybe the ASAP Mob if you want to count them, Brockhampton. You know, they're kind of in that vein of like hip-hop groups that people really like. But like, I just feel like they still get overlooked in conversation. Like, I think they're getting their praise where it's due, and they're slowly like growing to the point where they're like on the cusp of perhaps a mainstream boost. But still, even by like the indie sort of crowd, you know, you talk about hip hop and the conversation usually revolves around artists like Travis Scott, Kendrick Lamar, Joey Badass, you know, J. Cole even, Brockhampton now, and I just don't see him get referenced the same way that they should, because this was genuinely an amazing album that had great hooks. There were bangers on here. The rappers just have amazing lyrics points too. I mean, maybe not amazing all the way through, but there are just sparks of greatness coming through from Groggs. And Richie with a T just comes through with those hooks all the time. You know what I mean? Like, this is genuinely the hip-hop that we need, but I still think they get overlooked overall in conversations. And another thing too, on rateyourmusic.com, this is ranked in the 400s for 2015. In the 400s, it's sat at 420. Like, I'm sorry, I haven't heard all the 400 albums that are above it in 2015, but there is no way that they are all better than this. They just can't be. And yeah, I know they're very popular at this point, but just remember, when you look at the mainstream hip hop at the moment, and I know, like, a lot of music critics will say, well, the mainstream doesn't mean that it's good, and I get that, but still, like, there's so much out there that gets popular that's absolutely terrible. You just think, like, how is the music community not elevated injury reserves up to the point where they're really popular by now? Which is why I think they're deserving on this list, because they are pretty overlooked in that sense as well. So yeah, Live at the Dentist's Office is a great friggin' album. The last artist I want to mention on my overlooked and underrated albums list is Marina and the Diamonds. Now I laugh because one of my friends is obsessed with Marina and the Diamonds, but there's something about Fruit that I just don't understand why critics didn't take to it in the way that I have. I mean, it took me a long time to actually listen to this album. I didn't listen to it back in 2015 or anything. It was like last year, I think. But it's a genuinely great pop album that a lot of critics seem to love this kind of stuff, and I just don't know why it didn't appeal to that crowd. I mean, you think of artists like Hollywood Jepsen, Charlie XCX, Lorde, there's that kind of like group of pop artists that critics adore at the moment, and I just feel like Marina and the Diamonds should fit into that group, but it just isn't the case. I mean, yeah, sure, there was a massive audience for Marina and the Diamonds, and it's not like Marina and the Diamonds is totally obscure underground to the point where no one knows who it is. Like, Marina's had some pretty well known songs over the years, but like as an album, I just thought a lot of people would have took to this album, but they just haven't. There's a pretty clear Kate Bush influence on a lot of the tracks, especially songs like Fruit. But like that's definitely the best song on the album, man. It's a great song, and there are so many other ones as well, like Better Than That, Forget. Like, think back to 2015 and so many people obsessed over Emotion, and Emotion was good, but I still think Fruit had a bit more to it than Emotion did, to be honest, which I know is a bit of a risky thing to say because obviously Carly Rae Jepsen has a very big fan base now, and deservedly so. I mean, Emotion Side B was amazing, but like I still think Fruit has its place in that audience, but I just don't know why it hasn't quite made it. But yeah, that's my list. I mean, that's all I'm going to talk about for these overlooked. Remember that word, Ryan. It's overlooked. And underrated albums for 2015. I think there probably are more, but I'm just going to stick to these ones. Let me know your thoughts on these albums. Let me know your thoughts on what you think was underrated from that year. I'm sure there are others too that I've missed that are absolutely glaringly obvious, but yeah, this is what I think. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, if you like this review, and have a good day.